A volcano erupted in Ecuador's Amazon region on Tuesday, leaving several cities covered in ash. George Floyd's private funeral was held in the US city of Houston this Tuesday. Residents of a slum in Nairobi protested against police brutality on Monday, a week after the death of a homeless man who was shot and killed by Kenyan police. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. A volcano erupted in Ecuador's Amazon region on Tuesday, leaving several cities covered in ash. The Sangay volcano has had moderate eruptions for over a year, but a recent change in wind patterns pushed the ash towards the coast and affected areas including the largest city of Ecuador, Guayaquil. This has fueled concerns of the potential health impact of the ash in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, as the South American nation is still dealing with a brutal outbreak of COVID-19. Ecuador's Geophysical Institute stated that it expects minor volcanic eruptions to continue in the coming days, although no major eruption is expected. Perus' health system is on the verge of collapse due to a lack of medical oxygen. Desperate citizens have been queuing up for hours, with many turning to a black market to get their hands on oxygen cylinders, which can fetch up to $1,400 each. Oxygen is crucial to keep COVID-19 patients alive, and critical cases can use 4 cylinders per day, with refills costing around $50 each. Acknowledging the public outcry, President Martin Vizcarra has announced emergency measures to increase production and access to oxygen for medical use and declared the gas a strategic health resource. Members of Bolivia's Congress and Supreme Electoral Court are meeting both in person and remotely to debate a bill that seeks to make the date for the country's pending elections official. The legislation establishes that the general elections must be held within a maximum period of 127 days beginning May 3rd. The date agreed upon by all but one party is September 6th and must be voted on by Congress. The movement towards socialism, which won the October 20th election in the first round before being ousted in a coup, supports the date. Its presidential candidate, Luis Arce, is already in the lead, according to polls. The Superior Electoral Court of Brazil has resumed hearings on 2 lawsuits against the candidacies of Jair Bolsonaro and Hamilton Mourão in the 2018 presidential elections. Judge Og Fernandes of the Superior Court of Justice recommended that the 2 lawsuits be rejected in November, but Judge Edson Fachin requested more time to review the case. The lawsuits were filed by former presidential candidates Guilherme Boulos and Marina Silva, who denounced the hacking of the Women United Against Bolsonaro Facebook group a month before the elections. The group, which had more than 2.7 million followers, was attacked by hackers who altered its content. The lawsuits demand the annulment of the candidacies of President Bolsonaro and his vice Mourão, in addition to declaring the 2 politicians' ineligibility, having committed electoral abuse. In Argentina, clothes and shoe stores have been allowed to reopen in Buenos Aires, with the gradual lifting of restrictions following more than 2 months of coronavirus lockdown. The move will occur in 18 of the country's 24 provinces. Social distancing measures will remain in place until June 28th and will be more flexible in regions with few or no cases of COVID-19. Schools remain closed, while mass gatherings, shows, concerts and sporting events are still banned. To date, Argentina has registered more than 23,000 coronavirus cases and almost 700 deaths. The Colombian Attorney General's office has launched an investigation into reports that 3 of the country's Navy vessels were found in Venezuela by the Bolivarian Armed Forces, where they remain in custody. Deputy Attorney General Juan Carlos Cortés is leading a probe into why the boats were found in the Meta River on May 12th. The officers in charge of the boats are accused of being ill-equipped to navigate the vessels through the river, causing them to lose control. The Attorney General's office has ordered that more evidence be collected on the matter. And a Colombian doctor on the front lines fighting COVID-19 has expressed fear for his life after receiving death threats and 2 funeral wreaths. Jose Julian Buelva believes the threats come from paramilitary groups who accuse him of allowing a patient to die.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Julian Buelvas Diaz. I am a doctor. I work in the ICU at Adela de Char Clinic in Soledad. Today, I have received 2 threats, one at my workplace and the other at my home. They accuse me of letting a woman die amidst the pandemic at the ICU. For us, it is impossible that we let anyone die. We prepare ourselves to be able to save lives. This is a cry for help to the national government, for myself, for my colleagues, and for all the doctors in this country. By God, for how long? We got to work every day, and in many cases, we don't even have the necessary conditions, and despite it all, we face this pandemic. By God, for how long?
Though Venezuela is starting the process of ending the coronavirus lockdown and restarting its economy, this comes after a number of weeks in which the epidemic curve has been mostly flattened.
Early on Monday, the loosening of quarantine restrictions started across Venezuela, weeks after these were strictly implemented.
Venezuela tomó la drástica y necesaria decisión.
Venezuela has taken the drastic but needed decision to restrict movement. We all went under mandatory quarantine, and thanks to the social conscience of our people and our civic military union, we have managed to stop local transmission chains and control the pandemic.
Following some adjustments, from June 1st, the economy has slowly been reactivated.
La disciplina, las medidas preventivas de higiene individual y colectiva.
Discipline, preventive measures, social distancing, and widespread testing, going home to make sure our citizens are healthy. Everything helped, but without a doubt, the quarantine was the key to our success.
These measures have been adjusted over time, taking into account international data and the local reality. Venezuela was one of the first countries to impose a mandatory quarantine back in March 16th. As restrictions loosen now, authorities have called on citizens to maintain all hygienic and social distancing protocols. During the first 7 days of the new 7-for-7 system implemented in Venezuela, authorities hope to avoid a surge in cases. The people are getting accustomed to this new system, going back to their normal activities.
Most of the cases we're still seeing are coming from over the border. They say they are keeping things in control, and we can see that, but we recently returned from the Andes and there are plenty of checkpoints.
The hotspot for COVID-19 cases in Venezuela remains its border regions, where 80% of all cases have been discovered.
In Chile, the Council of the National Institute of Human Rights has called for speed and diligence in a clarification of the circumstances surrounding the murder of Alejandro Trujillo. The spokesman for the Mapuche indigenous community was shot and killed as he and others were out looking for a lost horse. 3 others were injured in the incident. Following his death, the community published a statement denouncing ongoing police persecutions in the area. According to the statement, since May 13th, the community has been under a state of siege. The council added that this situation is particularly concerning given that Alejandro belongs to a protected group under international human rights law. The council also requested that the investigation lead to the punishment of those responsible for his killing. Cuban National Director of Epidemiology, Dr. Francisco Duran, offered an update on the COVID-19 epidemic in the country this Tuesday. Dr. Duran was happy to report that for the 10th consecutive day, no new COVID-19 deaths have been reported. Duran highlighted that this is testament to the effectiveness of the protective measures implemented in the country. 2,067 tests were conducted over the past 24 hours, of which only 5 were positive for COVID-19. All 5 cases are Cubans, 4 of whom are residents in Havana and 1 in the province of Villa Clara. As of this Tuesday, 12 provinces of the island and the special municipality of the Isle of Youth have not reported any new cases for the past 15 days. Jamaica is making the final arrangements to receive international travellers from next Monday. The island reopened its borders to nationals on June 1st and will officially welcome all international tourists on June 15th, according to Tourism Minister Edmund Bartletas. The Caribbean nation has previously announced a 5-point recovery plan for the tourism sector. The plan includes robust health and safety protocols, training for all segments of the industry, and the building of a COVID-19 safety and security infrastructure. Jamaica closed its borders on March 21st and implemented strict lockdown measures amid the novel coronavirus pandemic. Social organisations in Guyana are calling for outgoing President David Granger to accept his defeat in the March 2nd elections. Smaller political parties have requested that the Electoral Commission release the final results as soon as possible after 3 months of delays and accusations of irregularities in the polls. The final recount and the tabulation of ballots was completed on Sunday, with preliminary results giving the opposition People's Progressive Party Civic the lead. Several sectors have now called on Granger to accept the result and allow for a peaceful transition of power. More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. George Floyd's private funeral was held in the city of Houston this Tuesday. During the ceremony, Reverend Al Sharpton said Floyd had played a central role in what has become a generational movement. Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, has the details.
Thank you. It took about 4 hours, the private funeral of George Floyd in Houston, where Reverend Al Sharpton was pronouncing his eulogy. He mentioned, for example, that let's fight on, he says at the very end. This is the beginning of the fight. He's also complaining about President Trump and the way that he was handling precisely the pacific demonstrations. He also says that they are concerned about how to stop the demonstrations, but not concerned about what he called the police brutality. He says that it's needed justice, the same for everybody in the country. Also, he mentioned that the police that killed George Floyd was full of venom, and we have to be careful, he said, that all of expressions of racism in the US has to be punished in the same way. Most definitely, now the next stop is for George Floyd, the cemetery outside of Houston, where he's going to lie for rest next to his mother. We get back to you now.
Peaceful demonstrations took place at Oxford University in the United Kingdom on Tuesday, demanding the removal of the statue of 19th century British colonialist Cecil Rhodes. Protesters gathered at Oriel College to demand the removal of the statue, pointing to the colonialist violence and racism it represents, a legacy still celebrated in the UK. Despite previous demands to take the statue down in 2016, college authorities decided to keep it. Demonstrations have taken place across the UK to protest against police brutality and racism, including a protest at Bristol Harbour, where the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was pulled down and thrown into the water. Meanwhile, an official campaign to remove Rhodes' statue from the university has been launched. Thousands of demonstrators paid tribute to George Floyd in the French capital this Tuesday, on the same day that his funeral was being held in the United States. Thousands gathered in Paris to show their solidarity with US protests against racism and police brutality. The demonstrators observed 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence in tribute to Floyd. Protesters also denounced brutality and racism within the French police force, waving a variety of banners and signs with slogans including Black Lives Matter, I Can't Breathe, and Racism Kills. French authorities allowed the event to take place despite a ban on public gatherings amid the novel coronavirus pandemic.
People often tend, especially when they ask me questions, to want to compare it. Can it be compared to the United States, etc.? This is not my subject. In France, there are anti-racist laws. I, as a young person and with other activists, wanting to apply to all aspects of society. Would like to never get to that point of police causing the death of someone live on television. But obviously, the fact that there is a dead person, there is a consciousness, a collective awareness, especially this is a death that we witness live. I insist on this because it is not the first one and it will not be the last. But the fact of having seen everything and not seeing this torture that he had undergone, yes, it awakened consciousness.
Healthcare workers gathered outside the Gregorio Marañón hospital in Spain's capital, Madrid, to protest against shortages of medical supplies. Demonstrators also rejected the privatisation of the facility's cleaning service. The protesters called for better working conditions, which have deteriorated in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, and stressed that they were severely overstretched. Portugal's Finance Minister, Mário Centeno, has resigned and also announced that he wouldn't be seeking another term as president of the Eurogroup. Centeno didn't offer a reason for his resignation. He's credited with bringing Portugal's budget deficit close to zero after it ballooned during Europe's financial crisis. He's also headed the Eurogroup, a framework for meetings of Eurozone finance ministers, since December 2017. His term was due to end next month, but now he has invited applications for the post, with a vote on his successor planned for July 9th. New Zealand has lifted all domestic restrictions on social distancing and mass gatherings after reporting no active cases of the coronavirus. The country moved to level 1 after no new cases were reported for 17 days. New Zealand first went into lockdown on March 25th, setting up a 4-stage alert system. Most businesses were shut, schools were closed and people were told to stay at home. The country's borders remain closed to foreign travellers, and all New Zealanders arriving to the country must abide by a 14-day period of self-isolation. Diesel spilled on May 29th in the Arctic Circle continues to move towards the sea, despite attempts by Russian authorities to control the disaster. The diesel that spilled from the Norilsk thermal power plant has now reached Lake Pyasino, and according to local authorities, it is impossible to predict how the contamination will affect the natural environment and biodiversity. As a result of the spill, some 21,000 tonnes of diesel fuel have contaminated the surrounding land and rivers. According to Greenpeace, the accident in the Arctic is comparable to the Exxon Valdez tanker spill, which occurred 3 decades ago off the coast of Alaska. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Residents of a slum in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, protested against police brutality on Monday, a week after the death of a homeless man who was shot and killed by police. James Murethi was accused of violating a curfew which had been in place during the coronavirus outbreak before he was shot. It sparked Monday's demonstrations in the densely populated Mafari slum, which went ahead despite warnings from authorities that protesters could face jail for gathering during the pandemic. In recent days, human rights activists have claimed that 19 people, all from low-income areas, have been killed in police enforcement of the curfew. Kenya's Independent Policing Oversight Authority said it was investigating another 6 deaths allegedly linked to the police since May 29th, including that of James Murethi.
We are going all the way, every ghetto to ghetto, telling them to stop killing our kids. Mothers are crying, sisters, everybody. We are all hurt by this injustice of police brutality.
Burundi's outgoing president, Pierre Nkurikiye, has died of a heart attack. A statement from the government announced with great sorrow to Burundians and the international community the passing of the president at the age of 55. Nkurikiye died at Perus Hospital after suffering a heart attack on June 8th. In power since 2005, the president was due to be replaced in August by his political ally, Evariste Ndayishimiye, who was declared the winner of the May 20th presidential election. Algeria is easing lockdown restrictions over the novel coronavirus as the government issued directives that will see a progressive reopening of the North African nation in the coming weeks. While some shops have started to reopen, a partial mandatory lockdown will remain in force in most of the country until June 13th. Business owners say that as soon as the government announced the reopening instructions, they contacted employees to prepare for the change. Hand sanitizer dispensers are being installed in all stores, and there will also be strict rules over the number of people that can be inside at one time. A huge fire broke out at an oil field in northeastern India after gas that had been leaking for 2 weeks from an exploded well ignited. Authorities also launched a probe into the deaths of 5 people who died since the gas started leaking on May 27th. The leak started after a gas well in an oil field managed by state-owned India Ltd blew out. Authorities have established an emergency zone of 1.5 kilometres around the oil field and evacuated about 2,500 people from their homes. Work is gradually resuming in Pakistan under strict COVID-19 prevention measures as a number of confirmed cases topped 100,000 on June 8th. But business owners say that they have been greatly impacted by the pandemic, and many wonder if they will even be able to reopen their doors. The Pakistani government rolled out strict rules in order for stores and some factories to reopen. If any of the businesses are found to have violated the restrictions, they will be shut down. Pakistani authorities started lifting the lockdown on May 9th.
My business was great before the pandemic, but since the outbreak, the business has not been so good. Over the past 6 months, none of the stocks were sent from China. Before that, we could at least bring 12 containers of stocks back.
The CIA agent involved in the assassination of Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani has been sentenced to death. Judiciary spokesperson Gholam Hossein Esmaili said Mahmoud Mousavi Maj was a spy for Mossad and the Central Intelligence Agency. He disclosed that the agent had provided information to the United States and Israeli intelligence services about the whereabouts of Soleimani, which led to his assassination and escalated tensions in the region. Soleimani was killed during a missile attack on January 3rd in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.